You're listening to Motivation Chaser, a show about finding inspiration in the books we read, movies we watch, and music we listen to. I'm Fabian Rodriguez. Motivation Chaser is brought to you by Full Stack. When you're a founder, you get used to doing it all. You sometimes forget that somebody else could do it better, faster, or cheaper. That's where Full Stack PEO comes in. They specialize in turnkey HR for emerging companies, not just payroll and benefits, but advice and expert services that help you and your people maximize potential. Find out more at fullstackpeo.com. Aaron Brockett is the lead pastor of Traders Point Christian Church in Indianapolis. Since he joined the church in 2007, it has grown from 1,500 people in one location to more than 9,000 people in 4 locations, earning recognition as one of the fastest growing churches in the U.S. from Outreach Magazine. On our show today, we find out what Aaron reads, watches, and listens to for inspiration.
This is Aaron Brockett, the lead pastor at Traders Point Christian Church in Indianapolis.
Aaron grew up in Southwest Missouri, and he told me that he never saw himself going into full-time ministry and that he didn't know what he wanted to do. Yet somehow, he ended up at Bible College in Joplin, Missouri. He said that this is where he felt compelled to speak, primarily in the form of preaching. After college, he and his wife served at a church in Illinois and then California before coming back to the Midwest.
And then 13 years ago, Traders Point Church called me. Their pastor, who had been here for 24 years, was retiring, and they asked if I'd be willing to come and follow him. So that's what brought us to Indianapolis. My grandfather was a pastor, which is part of the reason why I never saw myself being one.
Wait, go into that.
It's like you'd always hear like Reverend Brockett, and I always think about my grandpa, And so I grew up in church, but I would say that I was kind of like just a good kid. I wasn't really a bad kid or a really good kid. It was just kind of one of the things we did. So I never saw myself like becoming a pastor or going, into ministry or anything like that. And primarily it was like, I saw my grandfather doing that. Like, well, that's just like what he does, and things changed for me a bit. I think that I think it really started with me just wanting to help people. That's where it really started. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, well, how can I help people in really meaningful ways? And it grew from there.
And did you think that, what did you think that you would be doing? Like, were you an athlete? Did you think sports was something that you'd be doing growing up?
Yeah, I was like a subpar athlete. So I think for a while I thought that, maybe sports medicine would kind of be the thing. So kind of keep me close to the sports world. But turns out I'm not really good at like medical science stuff either. So that didn't work out very well. And then business for me always kind of seemed, that's kind of like what my dad did. So my grandfather was a preacher, my dad was in business, and neither sounded interesting to me. And as it turns out, I've kind of taken both those worlds and put them into one, because what we do here is, we've got a large staff and it takes a lot of organizational leadership. So God, I think in his, as he's looking out at my life, kind of gave me those 2 points of reference that actually benefit me now.
And do you remember kind of one of the first instances where helping other people became important to you?
Yeah, I was working a part-time job when I was in college. It was answering the phones for a counselor's office. And I was not a counselor. I was just answering phones. And a lady called that was just distraught and in tears. And I've had just a ton of compassion for her. And I was trying to calm her down and help her. And at one point she said to me, you're really good at this. And I was like, what in the world does she mean by that? But she was just like, the sound of your voice, like you're just calming me down. And it was like one of those things where it was like, wow, it's like, I want to help people, emotionally and spiritually. Everybody has those needs. And I think that was the very beginnings of a start for me to how can I help people in more profound ways than, kind of a temporary fix. I've been at the church for 13 years. We've seen a lot of numerical growth, but it's never really been about numerical growth for us. It's always about how can we help eliminate barriers that are actually keeping people from God. And as we remove those barriers, we find that more and more people get connected and get engaged. So our desire is that really ultimately at the end of the day, that people all over our city, even though they may not necessarily believe in God or believe what we believe, they would go, maybe they would have two thoughts. We believe you believe it because you're authentically living it. And our city's better because of you. And so it's like this whole idea, we tell our staff this all the time. If our church ceased to exist, would anybody in the city notice and would they care? And I think that for us, for me in particular too, it's like you're only as good as the team around you. And we are constantly trying to find and equip great leaders. You can go out and you can try to recruit leaders or you can build them. And I'd rather build great leaders. And my experience is that whenever we've tried to recruit a leader from a different organization or a different church outside, the vast majority of the time, it doesn't work very well. Sometimes it does. But most of the time, whenever we build leaders from the inside and raise them up, those are the best leaders on our team.
What qualities do you look for in a leader, and how do you go about building great leaders? Like, what are the things that you're looking out for when you see somebody and you say, okay, that person has potential and I want to, like, a lot of it is investing time, right? And you're taking a huge gamble on somebody that you think can be a great leader. Yeah. It's like, what are you looking for? I
think one of the first indicators to me if somebody's a great leader is the types of questions they ask. And number one, are they asking any questions? Have you ever sat down with somebody at dinner or coffee and, they don't ask you anything, or maybe they just want to talk about themselves? I think one of the big things that I notice in somebody who's potentially a great leader is that they're asking lots of questions and it's really not focused on them. They're just very curious. That's one. I think another is just, it's humility. Do they have a genuine sense of humility? I think it was C.S. Lewis said, humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. So it's that whole idea. They're not like, they don't have like a poor self-esteem, but it's very clear that they're not in it for themselves. And then, are they really hungry? Do they have a passion to grow and to make a difference? And I think those are all, key ingredients to a great leader. So it's not just competency, it's character. And we need to make sure that our character can handle our competencies.
And is this like this developing of leaders, is this like personal mission? Is this something that like the greater like church bodies behind on something that's going on? Or like how are you going about that?
I would say that it's both. I mean, it's definitely kind of it's a personal thing for me in the sense that like I've always over the last 20 years, like it's just sort of happened where I'll kind of look up and realize that I've kind of gotten a handful of potential leaders around me and I'm just sort of developing them. But I've not necessarily been doing it like intentionally. It's just been sort of happening. Yep. And it was, 10 or 15 years ago where I was like, I should probably be more intentional about that. And I think it's sort of bled out into our entire organization where now we're pretty lit up about it. I mean, we've got maybe, roughly 12 to 15, people who've been sent out from here who have either planted churches or have taken on churches in like a lead role. Yeah. And I've kind of taken that mentality of every great NFL coach that comes to mind, whoever that may be for you. You look at it and you go, it isn't just all the winning seasons that they had individually, but they actually had like a tree of coaches that came out from their system. Maybe they were an offensive coach and then they go and they take a team. And for us, we've been like, hey, let's not just win like 3 or 4 Super Bowls. Let's win like 25 through a whole bunch of different leaders, just raising them up, believing in them. And I've said to our team all along, man, if you have aspirations to do something, or if you have aspirations to do my job, don't keep that from me. Tell me, because then I can be intentional about helping to develop you. And then we can send you out in a real purposeful way. And we just, and I think our church has eventually gotten behind that. Yeah. They've seen it happen over and over and over again.
And that's like a cultural thing, right? Yeah. Because you have to have the right leader in place to put the ego aside and say, hey, I'm willing to develop somebody who's essentially coming from a job or would like to have a job like mine, right? Like there can be no place for ego there, but that all comes from the greater culture.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, if you don't think that you have great leaders that aspire to greatness or to even do your job, then you're really sort of fooling yourself. And I think you have to realize there's really talented people that are on my team that could do what I do and maybe even do what I do better. And instead of trying to suppress them down, I should invite them in and raise them up. And there's some risk to that for sure. But I think where the light switch really clicked on for me was when I was in my late 30s. I went to do a life plan, and the facilitator was mapping out my life. And when he painted a description of the impact that our church was making at the time, it scared me. We were like, we had just launched like our 5th campus, and we'd gone from a staff of 23 to nearly a staff of 150, and started churches all over the world, all the impact we were making. And it scared me. I wasn't like prideful about it. I was scared of it. And he asked me why. And I just said, man, I'm only in my late 30s. Where do we go from here? And he said, well, why don't you, instead of continuing to try to strive to build a great organization, why don't you start throwing lines down to help other people climb their quote unquote Mount Everest? So like in a sense, you've kind of gotten to the top of Mount Everest. That was his words, not mine. He said, why don't you throw lines down to help other leaders climb their Everest? And that really resonated with me. I came back and just told our whole staff, I said, I want to help you climb your Everest, to identify what that is. And then we'll do whatever we can to help you, and do it here. And then as soon as you hit the glass ceiling to where you don't think you can kind of go any further, then let's create a plan to help send you out to where you can do it. And I think that just creates a lot of health. If you've got people on your team that just think that they're there to serve you, even if you just give them that impression, that's maybe not even really what you are trying to communicate, but you just give them that impression, or that you're somehow trying to keep them suppressed down, then it creates a toxic culture. But if you can say, hey, I want what's best for you, whether that's here or elsewhere, and let's create a pathway to get you there. And that was really a big switch, I think, in just our overall health as a team culture. Because I would say, Fabian, like our church was growing really, really fast, but our health was always lagging. And I say health, I mean just like our team dynamics, our interpersonal stuff was always lagging behind that because we were growing so fast numerically. And we wanted our health as a team to actually supersede all the other categories. We wanted it to be a leading indicator. Yeah. And that was really the turn of the corner for that.
This show is all about finding motivation and inspiration in the things that we read, watch, and listen to. Coming up, Aaron talks to us about the book Leadership Pain by Samuel Chand.
Yeah, there's a book called Leadership Pain by Dr. Sam Chand. And I read it a few years ago, and it really impacted me a great deal. He just basically said that your effectiveness as a leader is directly connected to your threshold for pain.
The more pain you can handle, the higher you can go. So the idea is very simple. If you are the lead leader, your pain threshold is either going to elevate you, plateau you, stagnate you, or even take you lower. Because there's something within us that says, I don't want pain. But I call that bleedership. If you are leading, you are bleeding. You cannot lead without bleeding.
And I was like, holy cow, because I think that so much of the time I'm trying to avoid pain or try to make decisions that will be the least painful. And obviously, you can make stupid decisions as a leader, and that doesn't mean that you're being effective. But you can make all the right decisions and be in pain because either people don't like it or it hurts, it costs you in some way. And so he basically said the reason why a lot of leaders aren't as more effective is because their threshold for pain isn't very high. And that was right around the time that I had just started CrossFit. So it's like, that makes sense. It's like, the whole idea of like, I'm only going to be as good of an athlete in comparison to my threshold for pain. It's the same thing with leadership.
And do you think that there is like a direct correlation between physical pain and like mental pain, like your threshold for both? Do you think that they go up kind of hand in hand?
I think so. I mean, who was it? I don't know who originally said this, or it's just a statement that's out there. I hear it in the CrossFit world all the time, but it's like your mind will give out before your body does. And so I think that, you know, when we talk about like leadership pain, it's a lot of like emotional stuff. Like it's emotional pain that you're going through because you're dealing with people, or you're dealing with criticism, or you're dealing with fallout from decisions that you've made. And I think there have been a lot of times when I like knew this was the right decision that needed to be made, but maybe I failed in the execution of the decision and it caused pain. Or maybe I was misunderstood and criticized and it caused pain. And I could have like gone, okay, well, it's just not worth it. I know it's the right decision, but it's too painful. So let me just back that up. And we've had to just keep forging through it.
And I'm like a very literal guy. So like when you say pain, like what does that mean to you, right? Because there's the obvious, like if I'm thinking very literally, pain hurts me and like, ouch, I'm not going to do that again. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to excelling in leadership and being in pain, like, and you're describing these situations, like what does that mean?
You know, extreme discomfort, angst, anxiety, sleepless nights, harsh things that are said about you, watching people that you love leave. You know, there's like stuff like that, well, I mean, even in church world, for example, like if I make a decision that people don't like, they'll try to sway me by sending me an email saying they're going to leave. So it's like, you know, what do you do? Do you back off the decision? Because that's painful to have somebody send you an email saying that they're upset with you and they're going to leave. But if you know it's the right decision, I think a lot of times you got to say, okay, why am I in pain right now? Is it because I was abrasive? And if so, then I need to change that. Is it because I didn't communicate it very well? Then I need to own that. And maybe there's a chance where you say, was this the wrong decision? But if you go, no, this was the right decision, then you've got to stick to it, and you've got to actually grind it out. And then you come out on the other side of it, realizing that was short-term pain for long-term benefit.
Right. And, you know, maybe to keep the comparison going, like, do you have to become somewhat callous, right? As I look at my hands and I see the calluses built up from grabbing a barbell or you know, like a pull-up bar or something like that. You know, and that can have a negative connotation. So I definitely don't mean it in that way, but do you have to somewhat callous like your mind in order to, be able to take that amount of pain?
Yeah, no, I think I know what you mean. I think that I would probably phrase it a little differently, because I would never want to become like calloused to people. But I would say like developing a thicker skin. You know, I had a mentor tell me a long time ago, he goes, you're not going to get very far if you don't develop the skin of a rhino, the courage of a lion, and the heart of a teddy bear. And so it's just like, you got to have like this soft spirit, but like a really thick skin, because you're going to take arrows as a leader.
Up next, Aaron discusses Kobe Bryant's Muse, a documentary that goes behind the stats to reveal the story of Kobe Bryant's career, exploring the mentorships, allies, and rivalries that helped shape his 18-year career in the NBA, and offering access to his daily experiences, lifelong inspirations, and the battle with his greatest personal challenge yet.
I grew up being a Michael Jordan guy, so like I never really was that big of a Kobe fan like early on in his career. Part of it was because I thought he kind of came across as a little bit arrogant. Some of it was it kind of seemed like he was stealing MJ's game. And I think Michael even kind of referenced that a little bit. But my respect for Kobe actually grew a lot more like towards the end of his career. And then even especially after he retired. And then obviously, you know, when he died in the helicopter accident earlier this year, then you really start to kind of pay even more attention to who he was and the life he was kind of currently living. And my respect level went up for him. And I watched the documentary called The Muse. And I think the biggest thing that stood out to me was I think he was like really misunderstood more than, you know, what we probably even recognize. And the guy was incredibly talented and incredibly driven. But it was the little small things that he did that really made him great.
I do think with Kobe, there is a whole lot of pride in it, just as there's pride in a lot of players. But that if his level dips and he's just another guy, I don't think he wants any part of that at all.
Like the stuff. I mean, I think there's like a scene in that documentary where he's like at a gym, just a regular gym, like before the sun even comes up, like rehabbing like his Achilles that he had ruptured. And there's a guy standing there at the machines just talking to him, you know, and it just shows like his level of discipline when he had already achieved so much. It was in those like quiet moments that nobody else saw. And so I just had a lot of respect for his work ethic and then just really who he was as a person.
And watching that, did that make you feel like you weren't doing enough in it? Like there's certain stuff that I watch and I go back to David Goggins a lot, and that dude is just like a complete savage. And like anytime I feel like I'm not doing enough, and I may or may not be, right? Who knows? But I always push a little bit harder after listening or watching something that he's said or done, right? Like, did that do anything for you when you watch that?
Yeah, for sure. Cause I think you look at somebody like that and you go, man, look at everything that he accomplished and he still worked that hard. And I think there are times whenever I'm like, if I had that much talent and that much ability and I had accomplished as much as he had, would I have continued to be that driven? Would I have continued to do all the little things that kind of got him to that place? And I don't know that I always like the answer to that, but I'm with you. I think it inspires me too.
Yeah. And I mean, what is it about that type of person? Because I mean, they exist, right? And they're like the 1% of 1% is those types of people out there, the Michael Jordans, the Kobe Bryants. You look at musicians as well, right? Like the Beatles or something like that just reach the height of their own thing, their craft. And then they continue to crush boundaries and just do things that are completely unexpected.
Yeah. Yeah. I know.
I don't know.
I don't know, where all that always comes from. I think, and I think once again, there's the healthy version of that and there's the unhealthy version of that. And I think that, with any of those individuals that you mentioned, I mean, I know you're a big fan of The Last Dance and I loved that as well. And there's a lot of things about Michael Jordan that you would say his drivenness caused him to accomplish some really, really incredible things. And then his drivenness also caused some pretty significant damage in some of his personal relationships in his life. And so none of them are perfect. And I think it goes back to that thing of like when I'm healthy, everything that makes me, all the things that drive me, all the things that compel me, has a tremendous impact upon not only my life, but the lives of the people that are around me and that I love. Yeah. When I'm unhealthy, it causes a whole lot of damage. So I think that's true universally, whether you're the 1% of the 1% or whether you're an average Joe or whatever. I think we all want to strive to be the healthiest portions of our personality that we can be. So that way it causes others to benefit from it and not to be damaged by it.
And last, we're going to hear about a podcast episode from Patrick Lencioni that urges everyone to stop waiting for normal to return and just do it now.
Yeah, so it's the name of the podcast is The Table Group with Patrick Lencioni. And Patrick is he's a business writer that's written a lot of great books, The Advantage, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, all that. He's got a podcast, and earlier this summer, he had a podcast called Plant Your Friggin' Tree.
That's right. Plant Your Friggin' Tree. What is that about? Here's really what our podcast is about today. During times of uncertainty, and this is definitely one of those times, people and organizations tend to drift into paralysis. They're just waiting. And this actually presents an opportunity for those people and organizations who are willing to make decisions and choose a plan. Because it's precisely during these times that the best, most decisive organizations will drastically differentiate themselves from the pack. Because while the pack is sitting around wondering what's going to happen, we need to make a decision.
Right.
And, I think that if I were to go back 4 months ago when the COVID thing first happened and everything got shut down, I bet you there's companies that are like, boy, if we'd known what we know now, we'd have done this.
Right.
We'd have really taken advantage. And I don't mean taking advantage of a tragedy, but we would have shifted things and made a decision, and we'd be in a much different position than we are today.
Right.
Well, 4 months from now, today will be 4 months ago.
4 months ago.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's plant the friggin' tree today.
Yeah.
And that might mean a strategic change for you. It might mean a personal change for you. This is the time where great organizations and exceptional people make decisions in spite of not knowing what it's going to look like at the end of the year. And they'll almost always look back and say, I'm really glad I did that.
And it really resonated with me a lot. Like in this, like right when the pandemic started, everybody's sort of like locked down. There's like a lot of constraints placed upon us. And then we're like waiting for what's next, or waiting to get back to normal or whatever before we make a move. And a lot of businesses were doing this. And so should we just let this travel industry go out of business? Like, should we just hold all of our assets and wait until, all this calms down? And he's just said, he goes back to that Chinese proverb, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is right now. And so he's like, hey, right now you need to plant your freaking tree, whatever that may be. And he used, what really connected with me is he used an example with his high school sons where he just said, hey guys, you don't know if you're going to have a lacrosse season this year or not. So why don't you get out there and practice really hard? Because when we do come out of the pandemic, if you're not a better athlete, that's on you. And so I had my son listen to it because he's a soccer player. And I was just like, listen, man, like, are we going to have a season? I don't know. And luckily we're 6 games into his season. So we are having a season,
right?
But, we were just like, train hard because, this is the time for you to actually catch up. Same thing in academics. And I think even for me personally, I mean, I know, we got to the end of April and I had hardly worked out at all because I was like so tired and so emotionally spent and depressed. And I was like, all right, man, no, like I'm not going to let myself go during the pandemic. I'm going to dig in and do what I can do. Because when we come out on the other side of it, when the constraints finally lift, and they will, because history shows us that they do, am I going to be further down the line than what we were when we were going into this? And the same thing organizationally. What do we need to do now to make sure that when the pandemic is over, that we can honestly look back and say, hey, we're actually better off because of the pandemic than what we would have been without it. Because one of the things I think that the pandemic has revealed to us is that control is an illusion. Like we don't control much of anything. This just showed us. The pandemic just really showed you and me more of who we really are. Mm-hmm. So it's actually a gift. We can look at it and go, I mean, I don't know about you, Fabian, but there's some things that I saw in myself during the pandemic that I didn't like. Like I was like, man, this has revealed some weaknesses that I need to actually focus on. And it's revealed some strengths that I need to accentuate. And it's revealed some things about me that I wouldn't have known if I hadn't gone through a crisis like this. And so what decisions do I need to make right now? So that way, like, I don't want to like wait till it gets back to normal. Like what is that anyway? Life is always changing. But I really am focused now on what are the key decisions that I can make that when this current season of crisis is over, I can look back and say, hey man, we actually covered more ground than what we would have without it.
And that's it. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, share, and review the show. And if you're interested in finding out more about anything that I talked about in this episode, be sure to check out the show notes for links to everything, including all the music that we used. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Motivation Chaser podcast. This show is hosted and edited by me, Fabian Rodriguez, mixed and mastered by the one and only Jeff DuPont.